Welcome to Being Authentic AF. I'm Alexis Franzese, a university professor, licensed psychologist, speaker, consultant, and mom with over 20 years of experience studying authenticity. This season explores what it means to express your authenticity and to express it authentically in your work, art, and everyday life. It's for anyone who wants their voice and presence to align with their values and seeks to deepen connections with others, from audiences to colleagues. Through reflections and conversations with creators across different mediums, we'll share practical ways to put your inner work into motion. You'll hear about actionable frameworks for authentic self-expression, and we'll explore themes like intent versus impact, honoring the medium, vulnerability with boundaries, access and context, and why iteration beats perfection. Join me as we explore how to know yourself, be yourself, and evolve yourself, and then express it and keep expressing it, unlocking the path to truly being authentic AF. Welcome to Being Authentic AF. I'm your host, Dr. Alexis Franzese. Season 2 is all about how we express our authenticity and how we authentically express ourselves. I'm here today with Blair Cornell. Jeffrey worked in the theater industry in Florida and New York before settling in North Carolina. For the past 30 years, he has made his professional home with UNC Chapel Hill's Department of Dramatic Art, teaching acting, voice, and dramatic literature. As part of his job, he has been performing with PlayMakers Repertory Company in Chapel Hill, where he has performed in over 90 different productions. Welcome, Jeffrey. So glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, so you have performed in over 90 different productions. My first question for you is, which production did you feel that you could most authentically express yourself in?
It's a great question. I'm going to say a show this last year, Willy Loman in Death of a Salesman, partly because I have grown to be the age of the character, and my lived experience, I think, has brought me to that point where I can speak most authentically about being a man at the end of his professional career, and then imagining what that would be like if he were struggling more than I, fortunately, right now.
That makes really good sense, and it has me wondering what role you might have felt the least authentic in.
You know, I just did a play about 3 or 4 years ago called The Yoga Play, or just simply Yoga Play, by Deepika Gua, and it was about, strangely, interestingly, authenticity, because it's about a yoga apparel company, kind of like Lululemon, but they call it Jojo-man in this play. And they're having a crisis of authenticity themselves as a company because their holistic yoga practice has been sullied by their clothing line being revealed as having employed child labor. So they're trying to do a PR campaign, and so they decide to bring in a guru from India to help them, and they bring someone in who's supposedly the best, and he turns out to be white from California who happens to have gone to India over 20 years ago and adopted the practice and is a true guru and a truly authentic teacher, yet he's white and not Indian. And so some of the Indian employees of the company said, wait a minute, you're not real, you're not what we want. And yet his practice was absolutely authentic. Anyway, I played the guru. And I had to use, as the character did, he has an Indian accent. And so there was so many conversations around authenticity with that show, because the Indian person in the play, who didn't have any practice at all, was sort of jealous that he didn't know as much about his own culture as this white guy from California did.
Wow. So either through the perspective of that character or through your experience performing that role, how do we communicate authenticity to others in your view?
there's a level of trust that there has to be where we believe it. And ironically, my profession is based on pretense. We're actors. When I was working on Death of a Salesman, I spent 2 hours every morning for 6 months working on pretending to be this guy that I wasn't. And it sort of becomes a little absurd when you think about it. I'm working so hard to be someone I'm not, so that I will look and seem genuine and authentic to the audience. It's a strange thing, but it's something that, at least in our modern practice, we smell and sense and intuit immediately in a movie role or a theatrical role when we don't believe it. Mm-hmm. And we're only moved, even the ancient Greeks were moved despite the histrionics and the masks and all of that. They were moved to catharsis, supposedly, because of a visceral, emotional, cathartic response to what they believed was true. And ironically, even though they knew it was fake, and it was the fact that it was fake that they were allowed to have a visceral, emotional response. Mm-hmm. So it's a very paradoxical phenomenon, but I don't think it's so different in life where all of our personalities, I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I do think that we are dealing with constructs here where we look in the mirror every day and there we have that confrontation. Do we like what we see or don't? And in acting class, that's one of the first things we talk about for the scene or the play that the characters are in. Your character has a problem. Basically, they've gotten up that day, look in the mirror, and they don't like what they see. Or there's something in their life that they need to change. And if the play is good, the playwright has written it at a crisis point where they can't go on another day without changing this about their lives. And maybe it's a person in their life, or maybe it's something within themselves. But it usually has something to do with identity. Mm-hmm. Because I don't like how I'm reflected in your eyes. You know, we surround ourselves with friends because we like how they reflect us, you know. And if we're getting something from someone that we don't like, I either need to change you or I need to change me. But something's got to change, right? And that's usually what the stories are about, what plays are about.
Well, you just touched on so many different ideas of authenticity. And I have so many questions, but I'm just going to kind of rewind us a little and have you speak to how you define authenticity personally, and then also in your creative work a little bit more.
Boy, these are the big questions, aren't they? It's funny, you know, walking my dog in the neighborhood or driving in the car, going to work, or actually being in a rehearsal studio or in a class. I always try to imagine or sense or feel who I am so that I can be that trusted person in the room, either as a teacher or as a performer or as a friend or as a mentor or as a student myself. And that's a gut check every day. And I think there's, at least for me personally, I don't know what everybody else's head is like, but I've got role models in my life that are benchmarks for me in terms of what would this person say about my behavior? What would this person say about this viewpoint or this idea? And I sort of run those possibilities by my imaginary voices or guides that I have, like my grandmother. You know, she was taught in a one-room schoolhouse for 40 years. Maybe it's one reason why I became a teacher myself. But she was a very moral, decent person. Teetotaler, as it turned out. I don't think she liked the fact that I liked beer when I was in high school. She certainly didn't like the fact that after I was in my early 20s, I moved in with my girlfriend. Because I remember her saying to me, "Jeff, a good name is worth more than great riches." And so that was difficult for me, but it was also important for me to push back on her morals and ideals about what it was like to be a young person and finding love. And I found my own way. And yet she is still a guiding light, both morally, but also in terms of who I am.
Yeah. Do you feel like that internalization of the real or imagined feedback or perceptions of others can actually inhibit our authenticity? Because I agree with you, there is that kind of negotiated social exchange process where we're thinking about ourselves through how the ways we imagine others as seeing and experiencing us, and the judgments or assessments they might have. But can that actually, do you think that can go too far where people might lose sight of what's actually true or real for them because they overemphasize that?
I do. I think we all want to be liked, and so others' opinions of us are important. I think we find discordant sensibilities when that desire to be liked and included clashes with other ideas of who we should be. And so that's perhaps how we choose our friend, what fraternity we pledge or don't. Our politics, our clubs, are the way, the entertainment that we watch. All those things factor in there. I remember when I moved to New York, I was this kid from the Midwest, and I didn't think I was interesting enough to be an actor. And I thought, I've got to be more interesting. I've got to be more colorful. I have to be, I don't know, something I'm not. Who's going to want this kid from Western Pennsylvania in New York City? But I had somebody say to me, he said, Jeff, the best advantage you have is who you are, because there's nobody like you, obviously. And that vulnerability, that openness, Midwestern trust is attractive. And I think that this person was trying to tell me is, don't use that, but allow who you really are just to be that.
Seems like some great advice.
I've thought of it a lot, even as I've gone on in my life. I remember I was doing a show opposite this person who was sort of a semi-star, and I thought I was sort of this nobody cast opposite her, and I thought, oh, she's not going to find me interesting. She's going to see right through me. I'm this, young entertainer. And I decided, no, I'm just going to open up and be me. And she found me, I think. Well, she was acting. She found me interesting, and we actually bonded and had a great relationship and a great show, I think, because of that.
That's awesome. All right, so since we've talked about some historical aspects and milestone moments for you, lots of people feel like questions of authenticity start to be irrelevant around middle school. Age 11, 12 is when this question of the true self, of feeling like there's a way I really feel and a way I should present myself, starts to be attention. Do you have any memories from that chapter?
Hello 12, hello 13. I'm from a chorus line. Oh my God, there's a whole section on adolescence, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'm curious if that rings true for you. Do you remember thinking about that at those ages?
Yeah. I remember as a boy my voice changing and cracking in adolescence, and I was pretty embarrassed. Who probably isn't, but I really was embarrassed at my voice cracking. I also was embarrassed at my laugh. I didn't know how to laugh for a while there, maybe in 7th grade, probably all of 7th grade, because I think I had more of a giggle up into the male falsetto, and I thought, I can't laugh like that. That's not manly, right? Or that's not masculine. And so I definitely had some crises around who I should be, or how I thought people would perceive me if I openly and vulnerably just expressed myself as my voice was in those years.
Right.
And I was also chubby, and I was probably pretty awkward as a middle school kid, and so I was very self-conscious about my looks and my sound, and yeah.
Did you talk to anybody about any of that, with friends or family, or it was kind of something you just dealt with internally?
That's really interesting. I think I probably talked to my mother about my laugh, because I trusted her. I was close to her. I was close to my dad too, but I think in terms of social relationships, I think I may have talked to her about, what do I do? Because I found things funny and I wanted to participate, but I felt like I couldn't.
I'm curious, having been in 90 productions, if you ever had the experience of feeling like you were trying on different possibilities of who you could be in any of those roles.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we say in acting class is that there's no part that can't be you, because there are so many parts of you in everybody else, especially in dramatic literature. You know, we're under the umbrella of I are all these little me's. And so by the time you're 18, you've experienced almost everything that could be called on you to play in terms of the breadth of emotion. So now it's just specific circumstances that draw on that particular experience. And so I found it always exciting, challenging, and sometimes very difficult when a part wasn't perhaps so much in my wheelhouse as I thought other characters were, like Willy Loman in this time. And I thought, well, sometimes when we're in a company, you might be asked to play a part that you think, I'm not really that guy. But actually when you put him on, it's like, oh yeah, I guess I can be, or that's in there somewhere. Now, does that feel less authentic to me? That's an interesting question.
I'm listening to you and thinking that it feels like a privilege of your career path to get to try on those different ways of being. Because people, I think, sometimes don't give themselves permission to try on possibilities of who they could be in the world, or might want to be out of fear or habit or whatever the case might be, or circumstances that make it feel like it's not feasible. Interesting to hear you talk about that.
One of the, if I may, one of the things in theater training, particularly around the voice, is there's a book by Kristen Linklater which was quite innovative and influential, called Freeing the Natural Voice, and it was about finding that organic, natural you that can be then optimized through work, and expanding what is naturally there, but celebrating whatever that is. And that also spilled over, that sensibility, into speech and diction. And theater training used to have a standard stage speech, which was rather a mid-Atlantic, sort of like Katharine Hepburn in some of those movies, but they stopped doing that, because why are we trying to sound like we're in the middle of the Atlantic? Nobody lives in the middle of the Atlantic. So you don't sound American, you don't sound British. Where are you? So rather than getting rid of the way a person or a student naturally spoke, they said, yes, celebrate that, keep that. Especially if you're from the mountains of North Carolina or wherever, or from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, keep that. Now, add to that other possibilities through your vocal training. So it wasn't trying to erase who you were vocally. Add on.
Mm-hmm. So when you do perform, and it's a performance that you might code as authentic, that felt authentic, is that an internal feeling, or does that sense of authenticity come through the audience's reaction or response to you?
I think there's no way an actor doesn't feel whether an audience is responding or not. And when they're not, boy, you can really feel it. And that's when the flop sweat starts. But
what is that?
Flop sweat, your nerves like you start sweating. It's like, oh my God, I'm self-conscious, or I'm aware of myself, and I'm not in the zone. I'm not in the moment. I'm pushing, right? And that happens to every actor, and it happens, because the muse is not always whispering in your ear from your shoulder every night. We try to teach techniques so that we're always competent and good, and strive to be brilliant and inspired, but that inspiration is not going to be there every night. So so I guess that on those nights when we are only just good and competent, we can feel less appreciated, we feel less good, and the audience is telling us that, like, you know, so in a way we're not doing our jobs quite as well as we could if we had somehow channeled that deer of inspiration.
And do you feel like there are parts of yourself that you choose not to share through your work?
There's a famous story. A famous acting teacher, Uta Hagen, was doing this play, and she was asked to have an emotional connection to an imaginary child, which the character loses in the course of this play. And one night the director came back and said, "Oh my God, that was it." And she said, I can't do that again. I can't go to that emotional place of loss every night. That's too far. And so I think there, for actors, there are places where they have vulnerabilities, or things that they don't want to reveal every night, or they can't for an emotional self-help. For the course of a run, they can't do that every night. I mean, I've played some characters that are not nice people, and that's difficult. And yet the story requires that those characters be in there. Sometimes there's villains in a play, but that has a cost when you have to play that person. And to be someone who's that, and recognize for that, and you feel the audience, I mean, they believe that's who you are during the course of those 2 hours, and that has a cost to it too.
How do you cope with that?
Get a lot of rest, go to the gym, eat well, and some people have some before and after rituals, getting into and out of character. Sometimes in rehearsal you'll ask the company and the director to refer to you in the third person when talking about the character, rather than you. And you don't speak in terms of I when you want he or they or whatever your pronoun for that character is, to keep it a little objectified when you're not in the moment.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating to hear.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you your thoughts on the role of vulnerability in a performance. Is there anything else you'd like to say to that as it relates to authenticity or otherwise?
Well, I think when people are vulnerable, they are their most authentic. I think there's nothing more authentic than someone in a state of need. And I think, at least in my field, in dramatic work, that's what good writing is. They write characters who are in a state of need, and that necessarily is a state of vulnerability. But I think that is rewarded because of how drawn we are to those who are in need. I think we're just wired that way. And so I encourage my students to have vulnerabilities as their characters, because audiences will love you. They will root for you because they don't want to see you hurt. They want to see you get what you need. And that doesn't mean you can't be strong. A lion stalking a zebra or a gazelle is very strong, but he's also exposed his vulnerability. I need that. I am hungry. And if I don't get that, I could be laughed at, as well as to go hungry.
On that note, is there any other advice that you'd offer a student who is struggling with how to, express themselves authentically in their art?
I'll diverge to answer that question just a bit. On Netflix, there's a series called Chef's Table, and I like watching it because it's about cooking. But it's really also about creativity, because these chefs are incredible artists. And they have a bit of a formula, because they are brilliant technicians and they make a splash, and then they inevitably hit a wall. And it isn't until they are in the wilderness with their art of cooking and find their voice, their creative voice again, by coming back to their roots. Every one of them goes back to where they were from, their mother's cooking or their neighborhood cooking, and what they were trying to go beyond they go back, they rediscover, and then they embellish and add to without losing that root of who they were. And I think it is instructive for all artists to remember who they are, where they've come from. Similarly, as I was given the advice about, own being the Midwestern kid, own who you are and trust that that will be enough. I say that a lot to my students, especially if they're struggling. You are enough. You will be interesting enough. You will be compelling enough. You will be engaging enough if you are honest and truthful about that need, that vulnerability.
Who are your authenticity heroes or role models?
Well, I guess I have to go back to my grandma because of how I think of her all the time. My first acting teacher in undergrad, I went to Westminster College north of Pittsburgh. It was a BA, a liberal arts school with a terrific drama program at the time. And this teacher, Dr. Earl Lammel, and this sounds a little indelicate, but he would just let you know if he didn't believe what you were doing. He would just say, bullshit. I could hear him from the back of the theater. And that's maybe the way we want to teach nowadays. We might want to pick up a different tool. And yet he was guiding me back to the truth of what it is I was saying, why I was saying it. Every line that you do you're not memorizing lines, you're memorizing the reason you're speaking those lines. Mm-hmm. So you're memorizing impulses. That's what you're rehearsing. You're rehearsing the inspiration for the breath that makes the words necessary to come out. So anyway, Dr. Lammel, I would say is a voice a role model for that.
I'm just stuck with the inspiration for the breath that makes the words come out. I think was the way you just said that. It's a really beautiful phrasing.
It's coupled with, as actors, we have to really talk. And I think audiences will sense in a minute if you're not really talking, if you're just doing your lines, or if it all seems remembered. It has to sound as if it's happening for the first time. And that's the real hard part, because you know exactly what you're about to say. You know exactly what they're going to do. How do you pretend as if it's never happened? But that's sort of, how do you ride a bike? It should be impossible, and yet we do,
So do you think that, I'm going to detour a little bit away from performance specifically, do you think that we have kind of any ethical mandate or requirement to be authentic with each other?
I'll say yes. I think that is a responsibility. Yes, there are white lies that we need to engage in for social convention, but I think a civilization is built on an exchange of ideas, of exchange of knowledge, and if we don't trust each other to believe each other, I don't know how we can agree on building this house that we got to build together, or deciding on this currency that we're going to use, or what are we going to do if someone's not nice to another person. If we're not really able to trust each other, then none of that's possible.
And do you feel that all people have equal access to being authentic, or do you feel like it's a form of privilege to get to be authentic?
Oh, that's another great question. I do. As an educated white male, I have had a very interesting journey myself in these past years as I've learned to recognize my privilege. And so I have to assume that there is, because I have been the beneficiary of so much privilege in my life that I didn't recognize before. So I'll without knowing, I will say yes.
I would agree that it is a form of privilege to get to be authentic. And I'm curious if you think there's a difference between being authentic and being original.
Boy, that's another. You're full of great questions. Not necessarily, although originality, I think, can be rewarded, whereas just authenticity may not be. I think we appreciate being of interest, and I've said to my students, one of the exercises we do is call it an object exercise, where they have 2 to 3 minutes where they play themselves at home alone, except they have to do this publicly in front of a class. 2 to 3 minutes of behavior, coming in from somewhere, doing a few tasks, and then leaving. And they have to time it so it's within those 2 to 3 minutes. And I say, don't act, don't story tell, but if it's interesting, that's all the better. Only because we have an obligation to be selective in our behavior, because just as the artist only has so much canvas to put within the frame, they choose what they're going to put there. Well, we only have so much time to tell our story, and so the behavior that we choose to exhibit or embody has to be selective necessarily. And so, yeah, I think we have an obligation to be interesting. If that's original, all the better.
Great. So in our last moments of this episode, is there anything I haven't asked you related to authenticity in performing, or anything about authenticity generally that you'd like to speak to or share?
Well, one of the things it's come about that's really important and good is something that's called, for better or for worse, authentic casting, where who is seen as castable in a certain role, depending on how that character is written, has undergone some re-examination necessarily, so that a person's lived experience as a human being, as the artist, there might be some roles that should show some deference and preference to those who have a lived experience that's closest to that character's lived experience, especially in terms of differently abled people or different cultural or ethnic experiences that the show or the play is using or telling. And that's an important part of our conversation in the theater world and in the cinema world too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with me about authenticity today. I've learned so much from listening to you, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Being Authentic AF. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our series wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep being authentic AF and let that authenticity uplift and inspire others. Take care.